Hello and welcome to Smart Coach. Today we are going to take a look at the religious development that took place during the tripartite struggle. In my last class I had discussed how art developed, how literature developed, how science developed during the reign of Palas, Pratiharas and Rashtrakuta. Now it is very important to understand what was the religious development that took place during this time. Now another important fact that I would want to mention here, though we study Bhakti movement later in medieval India, maybe during Mughal age, but one has to understand the seed of Bhakti movement had been laid during this time. So, what we are going to study? We are going to study the religion during tripartite struggle. Many a times a question has come, what was the religion that was propagated by Rashtrakuta? What was one religion which was adopted by Palas? Which religion was given propagation or propagated by Pratiharas? Now remember that though historically we know that Palas gave propagation to Buddhism and Palas adopted Buddhism actually. So Palas adopted Buddhism very distinctly, we can see that, but whereas Rashtrakuta and Pratiharas are concerned, we cannot pinpoint any one religion which was propagated by them. Mainly Rashtrakutas, because we know that Amaughavarsha was a Jain follower. He had adopted Jainism and he had given patronage to many Jain philosophers including Jean Prabhasuri. It does not mean that Rashtrakuta empire itself was a Jain was an empire which had adopted Jainism throughout the ages. When we look into Rashtrakutas, they gave patronage to all the religion. So did Pratiharas, and at the same time when we talk about Palas, patronage was given to Hindu temples by Palas as well. So when we talk about these three important dynasties that came during 8th century AD to 10th century AD, we have to accept that all the three dynasties gave patronage to all the religion in equal amount. Okay. Now, when we talk about Buddhism, Buddhism was a personal religion of the king who ruled Pala dynasty. It really does not mean they did not give patronage to temples, because temples were created, donations were given to temples as well, Hindu temples as well. So, if a question comes, did the Pala, the Rashtrakuta and Pratiharas gave patronage to all the religion? Your answer should be yes. They did give patronage to all the religion, and somehow these three dynasties were able to attain a phase of religious tolerance. So, let us talk about Rashtrakutas and Pratiharas. What do we know about them? Well, Rashtrakutas, though Amaughavarsha gave patronage to Jainism, let me write it here, Amaughavarsha gave patronage to Jainism, but other kings like Danti Durga, for example, he gave patronage to Hinduism, or his personal religion was Hinduism that had developed during that time. From a copper plate inscription of Danti Durga, we find inscription of Shiva or image of Shiva. Similarly, Krishna 1 takes the title of Parama Maheshwara. So, all this shows their lineage towards Shaivism, but at the same time Vaishnavism was also very much famous in Rashtrakuta empire, because we have temples dedicated to Lord Vishnu as well. Similarly, Pratiharas made many Jain temples, but at the same time Hinduism was also given patronage by Pratiharas. So, all these three important state had been able to achieve what? What can we say? They had been able to achieve religious tolerance. Or they had allowed amalgamation of religion. So, we cannot say that these states only gave patronage to one religion. Now, let us come and talk about the social condition, what was happening in religious sphere in general, even when these states, whether they gave patronage or not. Let us talk about Hinduism. During this time, there was obviously revival of the Hinduism, the Vedic philosophy was revived, and people tried to go back to Vedas. They started studying Puranas, Dharma Shastras were written, and people adopted that. Right from Gupta age, we see this revival, and it continued. So, we see revival of Hinduism. First point is revival of Hinduism. And how? We see three important sects being developed. First is obviously Vaishnav sect, who worshipped Lord Krishna and Narayan or Vishnu, and all the incarnation of Vishnu were worshipped. So, both these these gods, Narayan, Vishnu, and their incarnation were worshipped under Vaishnavism. Within Vaishnavism, a very specific sect was Bhagavatism, which worshipped only Lord Krishna. So, within Vaishnavism, whereas Vaishnavism talked about Vishnu, let me write it here, Vishnu or Narayan, and Krishna was supposed to be his incarnation, but there was another sect which specifically was devoted to Krishna and his consort Radha. Fine. Then in Hinduism, we also saw the growth of Shaivism during this time. Many sects started worshipping Shiva as their Lord, and Shaivism developed, and from Shaivism many different sects developed, especially in Kashmir. Shaivism became a very important center, and from that many new philosophies came out. Then one important Hinduism, one important sect of Hinduism was Shakti worship, in which God was worshipped in the form of goddess actually, and you see Durga or Parvati being one of the most important goddess of this sect. So, she was considered as a consort of Shiva. So, Shakti in the form of Durga, Parvati or Chandi were worshipped. But at the same time, this Shaktism actually allowed people to include even the local goddesses who were associated with fertility cult in the plethora of Vedic goddesses like Shitala, Manasa. These were seen as local goddesses who were given the standard of Vedic goddess. We understand that this was the time when local goddesses were Aryanized and they were brought into Vedic fold. Along with these sects, another thing that we see is the growing orthodoxy of Vedic religion. Vedic religion became very orthodox at this time. Why? Because obviously this is the time when from Gupta period onwards, we see the writing of Smritis and Dharma Shastras, and by the time we come to 8th century, these Dharma Shastras had been stringently followed and very strictly adopted in the society, and we see the growth of Varna system. So, this is the time when castes and subcastes and jatis became very famous, especially jatis like Kayast. For example, now let me talk about this jati, Kayast. You will not hear about Kayastha as a subcaste before this time. Now, Kayast were those basically in the early times, if you see, any person, whether he was a Brahmin or a non-Brahmin, who was engaged in the administrative activity was called kayast. Later on, they were given a recognition of a separate jati or subcaste altogether. So, Indian society not only got divided into varna, but then they got further divided into jatis. And then you see the growth of many caste, creed, untouchability, communities who were barred from entering the villages. So, there was lot of division within Indian society, and this Vedic orthodoxy also grew. To challenge that, obviously, we also see the growth of intellectual movement during this time. Now, while we see the growth of Vedic orthodoxy in the form of subcaste and caste, we see the growth of intellectual movement at this time. So, when we talk about these intellectual movement, few sects should be named here, such as Nathpanthis and Veer-Shaivas. Now, these Nathpanthis were the follower of Golaknath, and Golaknath was seen as a yogi who did not believe in caste system. Most of the yogis who became part of Nathpanthis, let me just write, Nathpanthis were follower of Golaknath. And the yogis who joined Nathpanthis were not from Brahmana caste, they were from lower caste. They denied or they rejected the dominance of Brahmins in the spiritual sphere of Hinduism. Similarly, when we talk about Veer-Shaivas, this particular community, it developed in Karnataka, and the founder was Basava. They not only rejected caste system, they also rejected fast, pilgrimage, feasting, any kind of celebration. So, they were not only against what Vedic orthodoxy was preaching, but they were also against Jaini stringent principle of following fasts, of having rituals, of doing sacrifice. They were against all that. They in fact supported widow remarriage as well. So, these two intellectual movements can be seen growing in India as a reaction to Vedic orthodoxy. Veer-Shaivas who developed in Karnataka, this sect which developed in Karnataka were also known as Lingayats. Okay? So, what does it mean? Why I am saying it? Because it really has to demonstrate that both these philosophies, they were associated with Shaivism. This is a very important aspect, especially the Veer-Shaivas, they were devotee of Shiva. And Shiva in himself was demonstrated as a yogi who was god of all the beings, and he did not try to demarcate between those who were Aryans or those who were non-Aryans, those who were from the lower caste, those who were from the upper caste, or even between demons or people. He was god of all. So, you can see such sects who were propagating freedom and liberty in society, who were against the dominance that Brahmanas showed. They were basically followers of Shiva cult. Even Golaknath, they not only they were worshippers of Shiva, but they also propagated Tantricism. So, this is the time when you see the growth of Tantricism. From Shaktism, it actually developed into Tantricism. So, this is a very important aspect. The Shaktism developed into Tantricism, and we see this adoption of Tantricism in most of the sects that developed during this time. Like Golaknath sect, they adopted Tantricism. Let me write it here. So, when we talk about religion and tripartite struggle, this is a very important aspect of Hinduism. that we have to understand. Further, when we talk about Hinduism, we also have to understand that such philosophical or intellectual movement not only developed in Shaivism and Shakti cult, but we see the similar intellectual movement in Vaishnava cult as well, and Shaivism, which talked about Bhakti movement. So, what are the things you have to remember? First of all, the sects and their division, the other subsects which came within these sects, and what are the philosophies that they followed. Tantricism was one of the philosophy, but Bhakti in itself became another philosophy which came into existence. Now let me talk about Bhakti movement. I told you that Bhakti movement, the seed of Bhakti movement was laid during this time. And how was it laid? While there was this constant debate between Vedic orthodoxy and intellectual movement that was going on, a man or a sage called Shankaracharya came and synthesized all this sects or all these divisions into one important organized religion which to be followed by all. Okay. So, when we talk about 9th century India, Hinduism was divided into various sects and there was division within the society, and it didn't look like an organized religion, because we also had local god and goddesses who had entered the plethora of Hinduism. This was the time when it got challenged from two important religions of the world, which was Christianity and Islam. Now, Hinduism had to come up with its own answer how it was going to offer an organized religion to the people, to its follower who were getting confused with the presence of so many philosophies. So, this is the time when Adi Shankara or Shankaracharya gave his philosophy of Advaita Vedanta. This is the time when he propagated the whole philosophy of non-dualism. Advaita Vedanta means non-dualism, means the creation and the creator is not different, they are one. As such, this whole concept brought the whole core element of humanity in religion. A religion can be propagated, but it has to be one which gives service to humanity, because if creator and creation is one, then everything that is created is divine. So, even I am divine, even the people who are watching this video is divine, and as such, service to humanity is seen as the greatest service. And in this whole philosophy, he also brought the idea of bhakti. He said that complete devotion to God can be a way to salvation, no matter which caste you belong to, which creed you belong to, and any ritual that you perform or you don't perform. So, what happened? He brought the philosophies of Vedas, and he said that everything that I am propagating is already there in Veda. Veda brings all these knowledge to you, and through bhakti a person can attain the salvation. But he also said that this bhakti can be attained only when people have knowledge, and knowledge can be gained only when people read Veda. So, this is how he synthesized the intellectual movement and the Vedic orthodoxy. Everything was brought together and it was known as Sanatan Dharma. So, let me write here, it was known as Sanatan Dharma, means something that is eternal, that is not to be destructed, that is the final truth. That's why it is known as Vedanta, means the end of discourse. This is the last philosophy of Vedic philosophy, and all the work that came after this was elaboration of Advaita Vedanta that Shankaracharya propounded. So, this is how he brought bhakti and knowledge in same field, and this was further propagated by Ramanuj and Madhavacharya. Now, this philosophy of bhakti was further propagated by poets like Nayanars and Alavars. Now, Nayanars and Alavars were the Bhakti saints of South India, and they wrote Bhakti poems where they highlighted the philosophy of Bhakti. These poetries, actually this whole concept of Bhakti later on traveled to North India once Alauddin Khilji attacked South, and somehow communication channel between South and North was established. This whole philosophy of Bhakti was brought to North India, and it got propagated in the work of the saint of medieval Indian history as well, or medieval Indian period as well. So, we have saints like Chaitanya and Vallabhacharya who propagated Bhakti and who said that Bhakti is the only way to salvation, it is the only spiritual need of the people. So, this is what was happening in Hinduism when we talk about 8th to 10th century or beyond that. But what happened to Buddhism? It is highly believed that Buddhism had started seeing a declining tangent during this time. Why it is believed that? Because after Palas propagated Buddhism, there are very few rulers who came and propagated Buddhism. By the time we come to 12th century, we see Bakhtiyar Khilji and his armies who destroyed the Nalanda University and even went to Bodh Gaya and chopped off the Bodhi tree where Buddha had attained enlightenment. Why did this happen? Because before Turks came to India, Buddhism was the only religion which was seen as a very organized religion. If you vis-a-vis Hinduism, which was divided into various sects and varnas. Obviously, Buddha was seen as a god. Because of Mahayana Buddhism, Buddhism had developed into something which was much more like Hinduism itself. So, in reality, if you have to write an answer, we don't see so much of decline in Buddhism. Instead, we see Buddhism merging in itself with Hinduism. With Mahayana Buddhism, Buddha was seen as God, and in due time we will see that rituals were introduced in Buddhism, where chanting was introduced in Buddhism, mystic gestures were introduced in Buddhism, secret rites were introduced in Buddhism, and Buddhism itself adopted Tantricism, and Tara was seen as a consort of Bodhisattvas. So, what do we see? There was a slow amalgamation of Buddhism into Hinduism, so much so that Lord Buddha himself was seen as one of the avatar of Vaishnav Dharma or of Vishnu, and Buddhism got amalgamated into Vaishnavism as well. So, when we talk about Buddhism, we see the growth of Mahayana Buddhism. So, what is happening with Buddhism? We see the growth of Mahayana Buddhism. And from that, when Buddhism adopted Tantricism, it further developed into Vajrayana. It further developed into Vajrayana. So, we see that Hindus who worshipped Lord Krishna or Shiva didn't had any objection in worshipping Buddha as well. So, Buddhism itself got amalgamated in Hinduism. Now, when we talk about Jainism, Jainism continued to flourish in India, especially when Chalukyas gave propagation to Buddhism to Jainism. So, let me write here about Jainism. When we talk about Jainism, Jainism got patronage from Chalukyas of Gujarat. Then it got patronage from Parmaras, the Rajputs, and then in south it got patronage from Ganga dynasty. All these important dynasties, they created important Jaini temples and pilgrimage sites. Like Chalukyas, they built the famous Tilwara temple. Then Parmaras continued to give patronage to scholars. During Gangas, important Mahastambhas and Jain Vasadis were created. Vasadis were the living quarter of Jain monks, and Mahastambhas were the pillars erected celebrated in honor of the Jain monks. So, Jainism continued to propagate itself, continued to flourish in India, but there was a point when Jainism was seen as too restrictive. The philosophies of Pancha Mahaprata could not be adopted by all, and while Hinduism gave the whole idea of bhakti, it liberated itself. People were attuned to Hinduism, they were getting attracted towards Hinduism, and obviously there was revival of Hinduism. At the same time, this is the time when we see the coming of two important religions. By 2nd century AD, we know that Christian missionaries had come to India. By 7th century AD, we knew that Muslim travelers were coming to India. By 8th century AD, there was Jama Masjid, which was constructed in Rashtrakuta Empire itself. So, Islam had also entered India, and people were getting attracted to these two religions as well. All in all, by 11th century, we see a society which is highly diversified with many religion, many sects, and then there was obviously tensions, religious tension were always there because of these so many diversity, but at the same time people had learned to live with this diversity in a very elegant manner as well. Other than the rulers taking side of certain religion, we don't see much of incident of communal revolt as such, which might grow in future, but by the time we reach to 11th century AD, we know that Indian society was divided as far as religion was concerned, but a synthesis had been achieved. So, this is all about the religion that had developed during 8th to 10th century. In another class, we will discuss another topic of medieval India.